Hare Krishna. Hare Bol. All glories to Prabhupada. Yeah, I'm a little busy right now. Yeah. I haven't done anything. Thank you, Hare Krishna. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Bhaskatya Satarine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasati Gaur Bhaktivindam Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Daniel, are you there? Okay, today we're going to begin our weekly class again. And I received homework from Shritan and Sunmukh and Arisha and Krishna and Shrestha. So this is our project of writing a book, and this is the introduction of the book, and the title of the book is The Science of Knowledge, as opposed to the theory of knowledge. And so last week's homework was read the verse of Srimad Bhagavatam 1.1.1 and add to the introduction the absolute criterion by which we can decide if something is real or false, or if something is an illusion. Also, look up scientists who believe that this world is an illusion and that there may be a magician behind it that is manipulating us. And finally, figure out why people see water on land and land on water. Is it land on water? Let's see. 1 second. Water on land, or no, they see water on fire and land on water. What did he write here? See water on land. See water on fire and land. Oh, water on fire. See water on fire and land on water. Okay. So. Oh, I just got the homework from Ria also. All right. So today, let's see what everyone wrote. So this is okay, let's start with Shritan. And question, why do people see water on land? Actually, it should be land on water, right? Why do people see I'm sorry. Yeah, land on water or water in fire. Okay. This illusion is called a mirage and is found in deserts. This is Shritan writing. This is water on land. It is when the ground is hot, but the air remains cool, which causes the light to bend or be refracted. When this light hits our eyes, our brain thinks that this light is coming from water, that the light is reflected from the water to us. But this is incorrect, and the water doesn't actually exist in a mirage. In a desert, a water storage is called an oasis. This phenomenon is caused by groundwater from an aquifer being ejected onto the land caused by pressure. Okay. And then, what? Okay, yeah, I already started. Then question 2, learn about the scientists that think this world is an illusion. Some scientists believe that this world is an illusion and we are just dreaming all of this. This isn't really proven, and I couldn't really find any resources on this topic. Okay. Question 3, establish the criterion if something is real, false, or illusion. To be illusion, to believe that something that is false is the truth. Prabhupada says that a material person cannot see past his imperfect senses, so he is illusioned. False, something that is not true. Real, existing, true, and not altered. Okay. Okay, fine. Thank you, Shritan. Let's see. Next, Arisa. Arisa's homework. Who are some scientists who believe this world has some other personality behind it? And Arisa writes, many scientists believe someone is manipulating us. One of the scientists who believe there is someone superior in this world is Nicholas Copernicus. Copernicus is a famous astronomer who proposed the idea that planets revolved around the sun. He went to a Roman Catholic church, and the church approved his idea and told him to publish it. Since then, he has mentioned God many times in his treatises, and did not find his work contradicting the Bible. Well, you see, before Copernicus, the church, the Catholic Church, believed that the sun revolved around the earth, and that the earth was the center, let's say, of all life in the universe, and it was unique. And at first, I think this is true, but let me just check it to see. One second. We're going to see if Copernicus, I think he was persecuted by the church, and finally he gave in and renounced the work he did. But we'll check on this. Nicholas Copernicus was a Renaissance-era mathematician and astronomer who formulated a model of the universe that placed the sun rather than the earth at the center of the universe, in all likelihood independently of Aristarchus of Samos, who had formulated such a model some 18 centuries earlier. Okay, so a Greek person formulated that earlier, before Copernicus. The publication of Copernicus's model in his book, De Revolutionibus Orbitum Coelestium, on the revolutions of the celestial spheres, just before his death in 1543, was a major event in the history of science, triggering the Copernican revolution and making a pioneering contribution to the scientific revolution. Copernicus was born and died in Royal Prussia, a region that had been part of the Kingdom of Poland since 1466. A polyglot, meaning he spoke many languages, and a polymath. He obtained a doctorate in canon law and was also a mathematician, astronomer, physician, classics scholar, translator, governor, diplomat, and economist. He's quite an accomplished man. In 1517, he derived a quantity theory of money, a key concept in economics. And in 1519, he formulated an economic principle that later came to be called Gresham's Law. The immediate result of the 1543 publication of Copernicus's book was only mild controversy. At the Council of Trent, 1545 to 63, neither Copernicus's theory nor calendar reform, which would later use tables deduced from Copernicus's calculations, were discussed. It has been much debated why it was not until 6 decades or 60 years after the publication of De Revolutionibus that the Catholic Church took any official action against it, even the efforts of Tolosani going unheeded. Catholic side opposition only commenced 73 years later when it was occasioned by Galileo. Tolosani. The first notable to move against Copernicanism was the Magister of the Holy Palace, the Catholic Church's chief censor, Dominican Bartolomeo Spino, who expressed a desire to stamp out the Copernican doctrine. But with Spina's death in 1546, the cause fell to his friend, the well-known theologian astronomer, the Dominican Giovanni Maria Tolosani, of the convent of St. Mark in Florence. Tolosani had written a treatise on reforming the calendar in which astronomy would play a large part, and he attended the Fifth Lateran Council, 1512 to 1517, to discuss the matter. He had obtained a copy of De Revolutionibus in 1544. His denunciation of Copernicanism was written a year later in 1545 in an appendix to his unpublished work, The Truth of Sacred Scripture. Emulating the rationalistic style of Thomas Aquinas, Tolosani sought to refute Copernicanism by philosophical argument. Okay, you see, Copernicus, what Arisa said here, I don't think is correct. Copernicus, he might have been a member of the Catholic Church, that's for sure, but the Catholic Church objected very, very seriously against Copernicus's idea that the Earth revolves around the sun. They believed that the sun revolved around the Earth. But Copernicus died, so he did not experience the wrath of the Catholic Church. Obviously, he waited until he was almost dead to publish his book. He probably knew that it would be violently opposed. The Catholic Church would be violently opposed to it. So when people found out, in those days there was no internet, so if somebody wrote a book, first of all, the printing press was just starting around that time, and most books had to be copied by hand, and not everybody would get a copy. The books were not, liberally distributed all over the place like they are today. So it took some years. It took about 60 years for the Catholic Church to know what Copernicus wrote, and they opposed it. And so it wasn't until Galileo picked up Copernicus's idea, and he also was forced to reject Copernicus and the idea that the Earth revolves around the sun. So that's an example. That just shows you some of the fanaticism of religious dogma. The dogma of the church was that the Earth was the center of the universe and the sun revolved around the Earth. And all of a sudden Copernicus comes and says, wait a minute, it's the Earth that revolves around the sun. So the Catholic Church didn't care about science at that time. They cared about, not having mud in their face. But Copernicus had died, so they couldn't do anything to him. But when Galileo accepted that and took it further, then they became, it says in March 1616, in connection with the Galileo affair, the Catholic Church's Congregation of Index issued a decree suspending De Revolutionibus until it could be corrected on the grounds of ensuring that Copernicanism, which it described as a false Pythagorean doctrine, altogether contrary to the Holy Scripture, would not creep any further to the prejudice of Catholic truth. Whoa, it's actually Catholic untruth. The corrections consisted largely of removing or altering wording that spoke of heliocentrism. Heliocentrism, let's write this word down, Heliocentrism, which means that the sun is the center of everything in the universe, not the earth. So they wanted, the corrections consisted largely of removing or altering wording that spoke of heliocentrism as a fact, rather than a hypothesis. The corrections were made based largely on work by a person named Ingoli. So you see, in the history of the world, there have been times where the dogma and the incorrect conclusions of a religion like the Catholic religion have been proven to be wrong by science. And the Catholic Church has violently reacted, by force. So then when Galileo went further with Copernicus's idea of heliocentrism, that the sun is the center of the planetary orbits, in 1633, Galileo was convicted of grave suspicion of heresy. Heresy means H-E-R-E-S-Y. Write it down. H-E-R-E-S-Y means believing something that is against the Catholic Church's dogma. Dogma means something that the Catholic Church believes to be true, but it's not necessarily true, but they defend it, even with violence. And Galileo was put in jail. He was put in jail. Well, he was under house arrest for the rest of his life. You see how serious the church was to stamp out any idea of scientific evidence that goes against the church's beliefs. And they prohibited Copernicus's book, De Revolutionibus. So they did a lot of really dramatic and mean things to stop the idea that the earth revolves around the sun. Okay, so that part should be corrected, Arisa. You should read a little bit more about Copernicus and Galileo and the Catholic Church. Then you write, another scientist is Sir Francis Bacon. He was an English philosopher and the founder of the scientific method of research. He had stated that along with the many things he was doing, one of his goals was to serve the church. He believed that atheism was caused by the lack of depth in philosophy. Okay, lack of depth in philosophy means lacking knowledge of philosophy. Another scientist was René Descartes. He was a French scientist, philosopher, and mathematician. He was a Roman Catholic, and his faith lasted till he died. He tried to establish the reality of God to be irrefutable. He made God the core of his philosophy. So you see this trend of don't go against the Catholic Church became very clear after what the Church did to Copernicus by banning his book and then putting Galileo in jail, basically. So everybody after that, for some time, for the next 200 or 300 years, did not try and go against the Catholic Church, but sort of tiptoed around, almost like walking on eggs, to not get their ire, I-R-E, their anger, and but eventually there was a serious reaction to the Catholic Church's fanaticism of rejecting scientifically so-called proven knowledge. And eventually there was a serious reaction by the 1800s, by the 19th century, where people just, completely went against the Catholic Church and their dogmas. So dogma, D-O-G-M-A. Let's look that word up. Dogma is a principle or set of principles laid down by an authority as incontrovertibly true. In other words, you can't argue against it. They say there's no... But see, that doesn't mean it's true. So here's one example. The Catholic Church believed that the sun revolved around the earth. And when Copernicus and later on Galileo tried to show that it was the opposite, the earth revolved around the sun, the Catholic Church defended its dogma. It's incontrovertibly true. In other words, you cannot counter it, that the earth revolves around the sun. And then eventually the Catholic Church lost the argument. Now, what is the truth? Does the sun revolve around the earth, or does the earth revolve around the sun? We would have to look into Vedic astrology to answer that question. I can't do it right now, but we'll just stick to our subject, and then we'll come back to that bigger subject. Is it true that the earth revolves around the sun, or that the sun revolves around the earth? We'll come back to that question. So now Arisha's talking about people who believed in the Catholic Church. So the homework was, however, who are some scientists who believe this world has some other personality behind it? Well, Arisha didn't get it right exactly. The homework was rather to look up scientists who believe that this world is an illusion and there may be a magician behind it that is manipulating us. But that's okay. What Arisha wrote is interesting. So she mentions René Descartes. So Francis Bacon, René Descartes, Copernicus. But when you get to these later scientists like René Descartes, Francis Bacon, they were being very careful not to say anything that would be different than the Catholic Church's dogma. But at the same time, they presented philosophical and sometimes scientific proof that the Catholic Church may be wrong. They didn't say definitely they're wrong, they may be wrong. And you write, Arisha writes, although Descartes was the main scientist in the discovery of scientific methodology, God was central to his system, and as he was extremely pious. Another well-known scientist who believed there was a controller was Isaac Newton. He was an English scientist and an innovator of the fields of math, mechanics, and optics. He was a believer in God. To him, physics was a system in which God was indispensable. He believed that sun, comets, and planets belonged to the system, which could continue only with the guidance and authority of an omnipotent being. Like all these scientists, many scientists believed in the existence of external power. Some other examples include Albert Einstein, Max Planck, Robert Boyle, Blaise Pascal, and Galileo Galilei. All these scientists have been recognized for their scientific discoveries and innovations, yet they have gone completely unnoticed for their religion. Okay. But Albert Einstein, although sometimes he spoke about God, he was actually an atheist. Now you say, well, wait a minute, how can he speak about God and be an atheist? Well, the Mayavadis also speak about God. Jai Shri Radha Nila Madhava Ki Jai. The Mayavadis also speak about God, but their God is portrayed as a non-person. That's atheism also. It's a type of atheism. The Buddhists don't speak about God. Mayavadis speak about God, but God is a force, an energy. It's impersonal. So just because someone speaks about God doesn't mean they actually believe in God. And Albert Einstein was a person like that. He did speak about God a little bit, but it doesn't mean that he believes that there's an actual person who's the supreme controller. Let's just see what it says about Einstein. Did Einstein believe in God? Reading into Albert Einstein's God letter. So Einstein did write a letter. Einstein had what might be called a night sky theology, a sense of the awareness of the universe that even atheists and materialists feel. So the way this is worded, it's worded is that even atheists and materialists feel something when they look at the night sky. So that doesn't mean they believe in God. It just means that they think there might be something out there that they don't know, but that definitely doesn't mean that they believe in God. Albert Einstein's so-called God letter first surfaced in 2008 when it fetched $404,000 in a sale at a British auction house. So he wrote some letter, and he died in the 1950s, I think, and maybe 30 years later or more, this letter surfaces that he wrote something about God. The letter came back into the news earlier this month when its owner, or owners, auctioned it off again, this time at Christie's in New York, and someone paid $2.9 million for it. A pretty good return on an investment, and apparently a record in the Einstein letters market. The former top seller was a copy of a letter by Franklin Roosevelt from 1939 warning that Germany might be developing a nuclear bomb. That one was sold at Christie's for $2.1 million in 2002. If you have any extra Einstein letters lying around, this might be a good time to go to the auction. You could become a millionaire. Although it bears his signature, Einstein didn't actually write the bomb letter. It was written by the physicist Leo Szilard, based on a letter that Einstein had dictated. But if auction price is at all relative to historical significance, that letter should be way more valuable than the God letter. The God letter was cleverly marketed, though. Not only does the letter contain the words of a great genius who was perhaps feeling the end fast approaching, Christie said on its website, it addresses the philosophical and religious questions that mankind has wrestled with since the dawn of time. Is there a God? Do I have free will? The press release called it one of the definitive statements in the religion versus science debate. Journalistic interest was stirred up by the question of whether the letter might contradict other comments that Einstein is recorded having made about God. In other words, Einstein spoke against the existence of God, no doubt about it. So all of a sudden, 30-some years after he dies, out comes this letter where he's saying something about God. This all made the letter sound a lot more thoughtful than it is. Einstein did have views about God, but he was a physicist, not a moral philosopher, and along with a tendency to make gnomic utterances. Gnomic is a Greek word spelled in English Gnomic, But gnomic, this Greek word is derived from Sanskrit. And the word it's derived from is Sanskrit is jnana. So, you see, this becomes very interesting. 1 second, let me look up gnomic. Gnomic means expressed in or of the nature of short, pithy maxims or aphorisms. Enigmatic, ambiguous. What is a gnomic saying? Gnomic poetry consists of meaningful sayings put into verse to aid the memory. A gnome was defined by the Elizabethan critic Henry Peacham as a saying pertaining to the manners and common practices of men, which declareth with an apt brevity what in this our life ought to be done or not done. Okay, so it's a okay, but gnomic. Let's go back to okay, I'm sorry, 1 second. Gnomism. Okay, so let's forget what I said and about gnomic. Gnomic is something that's mysterious and implies something about life and the universe and so forth. So let's go back to Einstein and his so-called letter about God. So, he regarded organized religion as superstition, but he believed that by means of scientific inquiry, a person might gain an insight into the exquisite rationality of the world structure, and he called this experience cosmic religion. It was a misleading choice of words. Cosmic religion has nothing to do with morality or free will or sin or redemption. It's just a recognition of the way things ultimately are, which is what Einstein meant by God. The reason that God does not play dice in Einstein's universe is that physical laws are inexorable, unchangeable, unending. Inexorable means, well, let's look the word up. Anyway, we'll come back to it. Inexorable means you don't really understand it. And it is precisely by getting that they are inexorable that we experience this religious feeling. There are no supernatural entities out there for Einstein, and there is no uncaused cause. The only mystery is why there is something when there could be nothing. So, in other words, Einstein did not believe in God. So, Arisha, he got that wrong. He wrote this letter, but what he meant was that there's no God for Einstein, but there's something in the universe that man can understand eventually through science. And what is that something? It's the apparent order or rationality or genius of nature, but he doesn't put a God behind it. So here they say, there is no supernatural entities out there for Einstein, and there is no uncaused cause. So that's the definition of God. He's the original cause of everything. That's in the first canto, first chapter, first verse. There's no other cause beyond Krishna. For Einstein, the only mystery is why there is something when there could be nothing. So in other words, they're talking nonsense here. Okay. So anyway, Arisa, what you wrote is interesting, but you have to go back and correct some of this. The scientists that you mentioned, Max Planck, Robert Boyle, Blaise Pascal, and Galileo. Well, Galileo, he was put in jail by the Catholic Church. Blaise Pascal, yes, I would say you have a good chance if you look up his story. He's a French philosopher. He might have believed in God. Robert Boyle, I'm not sure. Max Planck, I'm not sure. So, Arisa, that's your special homework. Look up their lives, Max Planck, Robert Boyle, Blaise Pascal, and see what they said about God. Okay. Okay, Arisa also writes about read the verse and purport of Srimad Bhagavatam 1.1.1 and add to the introduction the criteria by which we can decide if something is real or false. Very good. And she writes, we may ask ourselves what the real truth is. The answer to this is explained in Srimad Bhagavatam 1.1.1. The purport explains that this material world is temporary and everything in it is a shadow of the spiritual world. Everything that exists in the material world exists in the spiritual world, but is instead used for the pleasure of Krishna. Well, in the spiritual world, everything is used for the pleasure of Krishna. Okay. Many materialists believe that the material world is eternal. This is only because we have very short lifetimes. The lifespan of the material world is so big that our brains cannot accept and process the truth. When receiving knowledge, if the source is imperfect, then knowledge is imperfect. Everything in this material world is relative knowledge. When we say that today it is cold, we are referring to a time, place, or a circumstance. Very good. Similarly, everything in this world is relative, unless it is proven factual. Therefore, knowledge from a human being is usually imperfect. The absolute truth means that it is always true in any world, circumstances, and for all living beings. Exactly right. Very good, Arisa. If the knowledge is imperfect, like knowledge from a human, then it is not the absolute truth. Krishna says he is the cause of all causes, because everything is created by him. No one is above him. He has absolute knowledge. To know if the knowledge is perfect or not, it should be coming from Krishna or his representatives, a bona fide spiritual master, which is verifiable by the scriptures. When a living entity who has discovered the absolute truth surrenders unto the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality Godhead, Krishna, and accepts the fact that Krishna is the cause of all causes, then such a person becomes Mahatma, or a great soul. Only Mahatmas can fully understand that Krishna is the primeval cause of all causes, the ultimate truth, and is omniscient. For this intelligent person, there is no illusion, and he can always tell the difference between what is true or false. Okay, very good. The absolute criterion is that anything that is not connected to Krishna is false. And anything that is connected to Krishna is real. So, most of what Einstein was writing about God is all false. And so that's our absolute criterion. Okay, so now I'm going to jump to Shrestha. Shrestha is not only doing the homework, but she's adding it to the introduction to the book, The Science of Knowledge. So she writes, at the moment, there is much unrest in the world due to people constantly disagreeing about the answer to the questions of who we are, what is real knowledge, what is the purpose of life, etc. This is because the general people are bereft of the perfect science of knowledge. So that's the title of our book, Science of Knowledge. There is a plethora of books, meaning many books, which try to propound their respective concepts of knowledge, but none have succeeded in giving an overarching, complete description. The modern philosophers who study epistemology means how do you know if something is true or false, have a definition of knowledge which they call the tripartite theory, which is a branch of the modern theory of epistemology. The tripartite theory suggests that knowledge is a justified, true belief, that to really know something, it needs to be true. You need to believe and have confidence that it is true. You need some sort of justification to prove that it is true. Well, the Catholic Church believed that the sun revolves around the earth. And they had confidence that the sun revolves around the earth. For them, the earth was the center of the universe. And their justification to prove that it's true is that they saw the sun every day rise and then set as if it's going around the earth. So that proof. So they were convinced it was true. They believed and had confidence that it's true, and they had some sort of justification to prove that it's true. Until Copernicus came, and then Galileo, and then later on others, they finally had to admit that it was not true. So this definition, this tripartite definition, again, it's not a clear definition of how to understand if something is true or false. Okay, epistemology. This branch of epistemology studies justification of knowledge in greater depth, as well as the process by which people attain knowledge. So, there's a chart here, and under epistemology, first of all, the question is, what is knowledge? Second question, can we have knowledge? Third question, how do we get knowledge? So these are all materialistic concepts. But she's showing what basically what I think she's going to do is show the faults of the modern philosophers and scientists' concept of epistemology, and then correct it. Let's see if she does that. The modern concept of justification is primarily based on two theories of externalism and internalism, which both represent different schools of knowledge, rationalism and empiricism. Okay, so rationalism means you use your reason and logic, and empiricism means you observe things and experience things with your senses to derive knowledge. And rationalism is you use your reasoning and logic to have knowledge. Okay. Empiricism is the theory that all knowledge is only derived from sense experience. According to this theory, anything that you see, hear, touch, feel, or taste can be justified. Empiricism relies heavily on the senses opposed to the mind and intelligence, and hence fits under the category of externalism. An example of empirical justification is that you see fire coming from a house and then conclude that the house is burning. Very good. Rationalism is an opposing school of justification that relies heavily on logic and reason, like I said, and denounces the process of accepting knowledge through the senses. Rationalism fits under the category of internalism. Rationalism is the process of intuition and deduction. It relies on the fact that certain intuitions are correct. For example, one might have an intuition that every child has a mother. From that, they can deduct that the child whom they just met has a mother. These intuitions are called a priori, independent of sense perception, according to Plato.Stanford.edu. Rationalists believe that there are cases where the content of our knowledge, content of our concepts or knowledge outstrips the information that senses can provide. So while we may see that a child has a mother through the process of empiricism, through rationalism, we may actually conclude that everyone must have a mother. These two processes of rationalism and empiricism are the only means of justification according to modern philosophy. However, there's a problem with the tripartite theory because there are limits to both empiricism and rationalism. The tripartite theory, unfortunately, is not complete. So she's doing exactly what I said she was going to do without having read this before. She's explaining the modern basis of theory concerning knowledge or epistemology. How do you know something is true or false? And showing how they fall short of a foolproof method of acquiring knowledge. Rationalism is incomplete because it is based on intuition, rational insight, which can roundaboutly translate to a hunch. Hunches are based on feeling rather than actual information. Yet the rationalists say that a fundamental rule of rationalism is to believe in intuition. They themselves, however, admit that they have no way of deciding whether intuition is correct. According to plato.stanford.edu, intellectually grasping a proposition, we just see it to be true in such a way as to form a true, warranted belief in it. The nature of this intellectual seeing needs explanation. In this passage, the author is explaining how the nature of intuition is yet to be established. This means that the rationalists have not even proven the veracity or the truth of their own concept of intuition. These limitations of rationalism prove that there is limits to gaining knowledge through the function of the mind. Okay, very good. Through the function of the mind and the intelligence. So in other words, she just showed where rationalism falls short also, and then before that, empiricism falls short of it establishing what is knowledge. Edmond Gettier, an American philosopher, discovered this incompleteness through the establishment of his famous Gettier problem. He came up with certain scenarios that challenged that even when the three conditions of knowledge are satisfied, sometimes you cannot attain knowledge. Gettier explained how sometimes justified beliefs could be false, and that justification is not enough evidence to claim to really know something. Gettier's problem clearly illustrates how the theories of rationalism and empiricism are not enough to verify information. The processes of gathering information through the body, mind, and intelligence are not complete, but the general people have completely failed to acknowledge this issue and continue to derive information through these processes. Very good. There are numerous examples where this modern approach fails. For example, until recently it was widely accepted that Newton's law of gravity applied to all aspects of this universe. However, the discovery of the quantum realm has upended Newton's universal law. This example underscores that the materialistic approach of knowledge is incomplete, defective, and illusory, and most importantly, is constantly changing. What might be true in the textbooks now could be changed and proven wrong after more study and research. This effect of gaining knowledge from incomplete. This is the effect of gaining knowledge from incomplete sources. Okay, you forgot this is the effect. Hence, philosophers continue to disagree about the meaning of life, and material scientists constantly disprove their own theories. As we progress, humanity seems to only place its faith on these faulty processes of justification to define knowledge, and still the problem of knowledge remains unsolved. While Gettier managed to find the source of the issue, he failed at giving the correct process of attaining the perfect knowledge. So this is a general trend of scientists, philosophers, novelists, and so-called enlightened people. They explain the problem in depth, but they never really give a clear-cut solution. That's basically what Shrestha said here. And that is, and still the problem of knowledge remains unsolved. While Gettier managed to find the source of the issue, he failed at giving the correct process of attaining the perfect knowledge. So they can, oftentimes they find out what's wrong with something, but when they try and figure out what will solve the problem or what's the solution, they fall short. They don't really nail it. And you'll see that's the problem in many, many books that have been written. There's so many books that are written, philosophers and thinkers and so forth. And their solution sometimes is worse than the problem. What is this process of acquiring knowledge, acquiring perfect knowledge? Okay, now she's asking, how can you get perfect knowledge? If our body, senses, mind, and intelligence are not enough to get the perfect knowledge, then how can we get it? Will we ever be able to know something certainly? Very good question. See, she's written this very nicely. This is the introduction to our book, or one proposal for an introduction. The gap in the modern theory of knowledge is that philosophers only acknowledge that at best there is intuition or another dimension which they have no clue about. According to Plato.stanford.edu, our innate knowledge is not learned through either sense experience or intuition and deduction. It is just part of our nature. That's nonsense. Anyway, let's see what Shasta says. Experiences may trigger a process by which we bring this knowledge to consciousness, but the experiences do not provide us with the knowledge itself. It has in some way been with us all along. According to some rationalists, we gained the knowledge in an earlier existence. According to others, God provided us with it at creation. Still, others say it is part of our nature through natural selection. So this statement proves that the philosophers agree about all of us having some innate true knowledge. However, they have clearly stated that they do not understand where our innate knowledge is coming from or what it is. Okay, so still the question is up in the air. Where does knowledge come from? The innate meaning inwardly existing knowledge and its source are perfectly explained in the Vedas, the purest form of spiritual and material knowledge. What are the Vedas? The Sanskrit verbal root of Veda can be interpreted variously, but the purport is finally one. Veda means knowledge. Any knowledge you accept as Veda, for the teachings of the Vedas are the original knowledge. Reference Ishopanishad. In Bhagavad Gita 15:15, the Supreme Lord himself declares that I am seated in everyone's heart, and from me come remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. By all the Vedas I am to be known. Indeed, I am the compiler of Vedanta, and I am the knower of the Vedas. Thus, the Vedas are the best source of perfect knowledge because they are coming from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, the cause of all causes. Therefore, one should drop rationalist and empiricist methods of knowledge, which are time-consuming and produce ill results. It is explained in the introduction to Ishopanishad, if you want to research to find out whether man is mortal, you have to study each and every man, and you may come to think that there may be some man who is not dying, but you have not yet seen him yet. So in this way, your research will never be finished. In Sanskrit, this process is called aroha, the ascending process. If you want to attain knowledge by any personal endeavor, by exercising your imperfect senses, you will never come to the right conclusions. That is not possible. The scientists follow the aroha panta process, which begins from conclusions made through empiricism and rationalism, which are sometimes true and sometimes not. However, those who are knowers of the truth follow the avaroha panta, beginning with the conclusions made by the Vedic injunctions, which are eternally true. The Vedas explain knowledge as a science rather than a theory. They have a clear definition of what knowledge is. They explain the different levels of knowledge and also the process to attain knowledge. In the following chapters, the science of knowledge, as asserted by the Vedas, will be discussed in detail. And then she puts in parentheses at the end, this introduction is still being developed, which is correct. But this is a good, let's say, attempt to write an introduction. So very good, Shrestha. Very, very good. I have a couple of comments that I'm going to make. But this point, the Vedas explain knowledge as a science rather than a theory. That's the whole point. That's why we're writing the book, The Science of Knowledge. We're not writing another book on the theory of knowledge. The Vedas have a clear definition of what knowledge is. Well, that's to be explained. That's why it says the introduction is still being developed. Okay. And there's a nice chart here that Shrestha has made. I don't know whether she made it or copied it from a book, but it shows all the different types of sections of epistemology according to the mundane philosophers and scientists. And basically it's a bunch of mumbo-jumbo, as they say in English. But it sounds good. See, when you study these things, you end up more confused in the end than when you began. You had a better idea in the beginning, and now that you read all these different theory of knowledge concepts, you get confused. Okay, so now there's also Sanmukh. Sanmukh, I'm going to read this. He spent a long time on the mirage and seeing water and fire and land on water with a lot of nice charts and illustrations. So that's very good, Sanmukh. And then look up scientists who believe that this world is an illusion and there may be a magician behind it that is manipulating us. Let's read what Sanmukh wrote about that. In this world, each scientist and philosopher have different point of views and the reality of this world. Some philosophers, like Plato, think that this world is an illusion, while only a few people believe that this world is a reality. Few examples of those who don't believe this world is a reality, and their theories are as follows. Plato's allegory of the cave. Plato, in his allegory of the cave, invites us to imagine a cave. In this cave, there are a group of people who have been chained in a cave for their entire lives. Behind them is a fire, and in front of that fire, there is a raised surface on which they can see the shadows of whatever that's happening behind them. The voices in the cave, while the moving shadows, make the shadows appear real and talking. Plato compares us to these chained prisoners in the cave. He points out that whatever we see are just the reflection of the real world. According to Plato, whatever we see is just an imitation of the perfect forms. And according to him, these forms are abject, perfect, unchanging, and they are all ideals that transcend time and space, and they are the only objects of knowledge. Well, Plato got a lot of things wrong, but again, he's a brilliant guy. He got some things right and a lot of things wrong. Just like the Catholic Church have some things right and a lot of things wrong. Another example is René Descartes' solipsism. Solipsism. René Descartes, so S-O-L-I-P-S-I-S-M. So let's write that word down. S-O-L-I-P-S-I-S-M. S-O-L-I-P-S-I-S-M. René Descartes is a French philosopher, mathematician, and scientist. René Descartes argues that if we can't tell for sure if we are dreaming, then how can we know that what we know for certain any truth about the world in which we seem to live? In other words, if you can't tell if you're, let's say, you're dreaming. Prabhupada said there's a daydream and a night dream. And the daydream, whatever you dreamt while you were sleeping, seems like a fantasy. And what you're seeing during the day is real. But when you go to sleep, you think that what you saw during the day is a fantasy and what you're seeing in the dream is real. So he says there's two dreams. There's the daydream and the night dream. So then in this morning walk conversation with Prabhupada, one devotee said, then Prabhupada, how do we know what's real? If you say there's a daydream and a night dream. Well, what is our absolute criterion for knowing if something is real or false? It is Krishna. So if something has a relationship to Krishna, it's real. If something doesn't have a relationship to Krishna, it's false. Okay, so now what is solipsism? One second. So, solipsism. Solipsism means the view or theory that the self is all that can be known to exist. What is an example of solipsism? Solipsism is the theory that only the self is real and that the self cannot be aware of anything else except itself. An example of solipsism is the idea that nothing matters except yourself. There you are. That's the theory of solipsism. So, another example of René Descartes' solipsism. Yeah, why does he say that? Because Descartes, he said that the only thing I can be sure exists is I exist. I think, therefore I am. So he eliminated everything he was not sure existed. So God was eliminated and everything in the material world was eliminated. But there was one thing he couldn't eliminate, the fact that he exists himself. And how does he know he exists? Because I think. Therefore, his famous saying is, I think, therefore I am. And that's called solipsism. So, if we can't tell for sure if we are dreaming, this is René Descartes' argument, then how can we know that what we know? How can we know that we know for certain any truth about the world in which we seem to live? His famous saying was, I think, therefore I am. It comes from his realization that to think one has to exist, and that is the only truth. Well, he eliminated everything in the world that he was not sure of. Now, he eliminated everything. The only thing he was sure of is, I think, therefore I am. But then, because he was sure of one thing, he reconstructed the world based on, I think, therefore I am. And he found a place for God in his reconstructed universe. We can talk about him at another time, but he was a very smart man. But he also made mistakes. And then Sanmukh talks about idealism, which was described by George Berkeley. And according to Berkeley, the objects maintain their existence when no one is perceiving them, because God is constantly perceiving all objects. Thus, reality consists of only in the minds of humans and gods. Well, this is another theory of George Berkeley. Another approach to idealism was transcendental idealism. This was done by Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant was a well-known German philosopher. His doctrine mentions that the human experience of things is similar to the way they appear to them rather than being as they are. He argues that space and time are formal features of how we perceive objects. They are not things. According to him, objects in space and time are only appearance, and that we don't know anything about the reality. Okay, so then Sunmukh goes through different theories of knowledge of people who think that the material world may be an illusion. Okay, so you can see the more you get into the subject of philosophical understanding of knowledge, the more you get confused, the more theories there are, and everybody comes up with a new theory, and they're all wrong. So that's why we're doing this booklet called The Science of Knowledge, because as of today, people don't know what is actually knowledge, even though you have 3,000 years of history of people trying to figure out what it is. But yet they proclaim that they are giving knowledge to the public. Okay. So now, there were a whole bunch of words. We began with heliocentric, ended up with solipsism. I hope you wrote them down. Your homework is to write those words down and to define them. And Arisa has a special homework to look up some of the people she mentioned that believe in God and double check if it's true or not true. And now I'm going to talk about today's subject. Today's subject is very interesting because it's based on Canto 1, Chapter 2, Verse 19. Canto 1, Chapter 2, Verse 19. Canto 1, Chapter 2, Verse 19. Tadarajas tamo bhavo kama loba dayaschaye chetritara navitam sitvam sattve prasidati. As soon as irrevocable loving service is established in the heart, the effects of nature's modes of passion and ignorance, such as lust, desire, and hankering, disappear from the heart. Then the devotee is established in goodness and becomes completely happy. So in the Vedic tradition, knowledge is related to happiness, or happiness is related to knowledge. And the ultimate happiness is anandamaya bhyasat. The nature of the soul is to be happy. The soul is not something that's sad or lamenting. The nature of the soul is to be happy. That's the true nature of the soul. And why? Because the soul is eternal. So this verse, Canto 1, Chapter 2, Text 19, explains that the modes of passion and ignorance are eliminated. Their influence is eliminated as soon as one develops loving service to serve Krishna. But it says loving service is established in the heart. Now why does it say in the heart? Because Krishna is in the heart as the witness of what we're doing. So to have knowledge, you don't have to look outside of yourself. You have to learn how to see inside of yourself. Because the source of all knowledge is in your heart. If you look outside, you'll get confused because there's infinite varieties outside. Some of it are mirages, and our senses are imperfect, and so forth. And the more you look outside, just like this is 3,000 years of Western history, and they still haven't figured out what is knowledge. That's why we're writing this book, because they're looking outside, but we should look inside. And there's a verse like that in Bhagavad Gita. It's in the fifth chapter. Let's see which verse. It says, "One whose happiness is within, who is active and rejoices within, and whose aim is inward, is actually the perfect mystic. He is liberated in the Supreme, and ultimately he attains the Supreme." And then Prabhupada writes in the purport, unless one is able to relish happiness from within, how can one retire from the external engagements meant for deriving superficial happiness? A liberated person enjoys happiness by factual experience. He can therefore sit silently at any place and enjoy the activities of life from within. Such a liberated person no longer desires external material happiness. This state is called Brahmabhuta, attaining which one is assured of going back to Godhead, back to home. This is a big subject. It's a very big subject. Well, we're not going to discuss it now. Your homework is to read the purport to 1:2:19 and see the correlation between knowledge and happiness. They don't teach this in school, I'm telling you right now. You can go even to the highest course of philosophy, up to PhD level in the university. You will not learn this. Nobody is talking about this. They don't know because they don't understand what is knowledge and how it's related to happiness. You see, unless we read Srimad Bhagavatam with Srila Prabhupada's purports and Bhagavad Gita with Srila Prabhupada's purports, we remain dummies even if we have 100 PhDs. Because the real proof that you have knowledge is happiness. And that happiness is independent of everything happening in the material world. This is a big subject. Very few people understand this. Okay, so you got your homework. And I will, if you have any questions, you can ask them now. But understand one thing. You cannot learn this anywhere else. Nobody's teaching this. Nobody's teaching this. Only Prabhupada and the Acharyas, Gaudiya Vaishnava Acharyas and the Vaishnava Acharyas are teaching this. It's Bhagavad Gita 5th chapter. What was the last verse I quoted? Bhagavad Gita 5th chapter, verse 24. Huh? Okay, 5th chapter, verse 24, Bhagavad Gita. Happiness within. Everybody's looking for happiness outside. Disneyland. The hemp fest, the Bhangra this and Bhangra that, and hip hop music. Everyone's looking for happiness inside, outside, when the happiness is within. Just the opposite. Haribol, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Any other questions? No questions, no answers. Thank you very much, and have fun doing homework, because this homework leads to happiness. Haribol.